Hey guys, welcome back to a page in the chapter, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Paige and today we're going through some fantasy books that you need to read this autumn. I have a burnt orange dress on, I have a pumpkin spice latte here, like you know that it's gonna be an autumnal video. So in this video I have all of my favourite fantasy specifically books to read in autumn divided into 3 different categories, and they all kind of fit into one of those categories. I do very much plan on doing a non-fantasy version of this video if that is more your speed. That one will be a bit more random because that's going to have dark academia, romance, contemporaries, historical romances, anything not fantasy basically will be going in the follow-up to this video, so do stay tuned for that. If that is more your speed, fair enough, completely understand. But I know that as it starts to get colder, I start to reach for the fantasy books. It has never been truer than this year, so I have put together a little bit of a fantasy guide for autumn. So if you guys like the sound of this video and you would like to see more, then do please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below to stay tuned for future content. I upload twice a week on a Wednesday and a Friday, so there is no shortage of bookish content here for you to enjoy. You can also check me out on Instagram and Twitter at Page in Chapter to see what I'm reading and how I'm reviewing it in real time. I do hope that you guys enjoy this video and you find some recommendations in here that you haven't otherwise seen, or the way that I describe them makes you actually want to pick them up. Do let me know in the comment section if this is something that you enjoy or you find anything that you're interested in reading. And without further ado, let's get into the books. The first category that I have to share with you is the absolutely lose yourself and immerse yourself in a different world type of fantasies. These are fantasy books that just completely blew me away from how immersive they were. So that is the first category. It's not to say that the other books in the other categories weren't immersive, but this is just the defining feature that these 3 books have in common, and why I like them for autumn is because they are a lose yourself kind of fantasy. So the first one that we have is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I gave this 5 stars and I stand by that rating. This is a fantasy Romeo and Juliet retelling set in Shanghai where there is a viral monster plague, and it follows Juliet and Roma having to team up despite being in separate gangs in order to take down this monster that is threatening both of their gangs. What I particularly loved about this book was the world building and the politics. It's it is an urban fantasy, but Chloe Gong is so good at managing to put politics and history into her books. Oh yeah, this is also set in the 1920s, just in case it couldn't get any better. And even though this was for a young adult audience, Chloe Gong still manages to get the political history in there and make it feel like it's accessible to adult fantasy readers too, because sometimes YA fantasy can feel a bit too young for me now, but this one really didn't. I feel like if it had had more gore or more steamier romance, then it could have so easily been an adult fantasy without much changing about the story. So I do feel like it's just an accessible book for absolutely everyone, and you can get so lost in it, whether you're trying to avoid autumn because you're sad that summer is over, whether it's back to school season and you're starting to feel the stress and you just want to lose yourself in something. I don't know what the reasoning would be, but this is a great one to just have a hot chocolate, have a nice coffee, whatever it is that you want to be having, sit by a rainy window, and you can just stay there all day. You're not going to come up for air with this book, and that's why it is in this category. The next one is a more conventionally autumnal one, and that is The Poppy War by R.F. Kuang. I have just finished this trilogy and I am obsessed with it. You may be wondering why Babel is not on this list as well, and that is because I haven't read Babel yet because I'm waiting for October, so I cannot recommend you a book that I have yet to read. But this one I have indeed read, and this one is such a perfect lose yourself fantasy. So I will warn you that there are a lot of content warnings, trigger warnings for this series. I would look them up before going in. This is a very, very heavy military war fantasy series, and I really didn't think that I would like it but I wasn't really aware of how dark this series gets when I went in. So what I particularly love about this book specifically is that the first half of this book follows our main character Rin as she tries desperately hard to study so that she can get into one of the most elite schools in the country, and she's like from the south, which has terrible education, is kind of deemed lesser than the rest of the country, and without all of the like heavy tutoring that the kids from the north get, she manages to get into this school. And then it is about her in this school setting, learning, also dealing with a lot of the prejudice and racism that she is dealing with. And then in the second half of this book we get to the really heavy war fantasy stuff. But I do feel like this is it's not easy reading, it's not light reading, but it is very doable reading. With every single book in this series I have avoided picking up the next one because I felt like it's going to be too heavy for me to actually enjoy it, and that has never once been the case. I have always picked up the book and just been able to kind of fly through it. I do think that the world building and the politics and everything is just so incredible in this book. Like, it is completely new. It is influenced by Chinese history, yes, but so much of like the war strategy and things like that, it's just so clever how R.F. Kuang is thinking like 10 steps ahead in the writing of this book, and I am obsessed with it. So if you would like that kind of school setting but then maybe going into something a bit darker as the month goes on, then this is a very perfect book to do that with, because it starts off light and gradually gets darker and darker, but it's still very easy to read. And then the final book that we have in this category is one that I read last October and is one of my personal favourites. The Once and Future Witches by Alex E. Harrow. I adored this book. I read it for the Magical Hopathon last October. I was on holiday and I just remember it being such a good vibe. So this is a very, very, very complex fantasy, but in a good way. You keep thinking you're at the end and then it's like, oh wait, no, that tiny little thread hasn't been solved yet. And then it launches you back in to solve that little thread. Like, it's so good. So this is a historical fantasy and it follows 3 sisters, and they have become a little bit estranged from each other. But there used to be Salem, which had witches, and then with the Salem witch trials the whole of Salem pretty much got burnt down. Society started a new Salem where there is no such thing as witchcraft. Women are subjects, and that is that. And this book kind of traces how female empowerment and witchcraft are very much intertwined. Alex E. Harrow is really investigating this theme of feminism in the Salem witch trials, but she's doing it whilst also adding an actual fantastical magical element. And we follow these 3 sisters as they are all drawn back to New Salem and interacting with each other whilst they teach other women witchcraft so that they can stop just being subjugated and overthrow the patriarchy. It is an absolutely incredible read. I feel like I learnt so much. I don't have room this October to reread this, but I really want to. It was just such a good read. I could not put it down, and I recommend it to you immensely this spooky season because it has everything. It is witchy, it is Halloweeny, but it is also historical and dark, but not so dark that I wouldn't enjoy it because I'm not really a dark reader. So if you like spooky touches without really going into your thrillers or your horrors, this is an absolutely perfect book for you. And so now we have my personal favourite brand of fantasy books. This is my favourite category and the one that I read in most, and probably the whole like inspiration for this video, and that is the cozy fantasy books. So cozy is where I really find my stride. If a book is cozy but also autumnal at the same time, like, I am there. And all of the books that I have for you in this category are like the best versions of this vibe. So if you are looking for that, all of the books in this category, or reach out to me personally for other ones if you have read all of the ones in this category, because we would just be the same person if you are also a cozy autumnal fantasy reader. It's such a small niche, but it is my whole life. it is where I thrive. So the very first book that I have for you on this list is Stardust by Neil Gaiman. This is a contender for my favourite book of all time. I have also seen and loved the movie. I kind of grew up watching the movie. I wasn't even aware it was a book until 2020, I believe. Thing is though, the movie really takes some creative liberties and I can look at them as separate entities. This is not a which is better, the book or the movie thing, because to me they are both like on a par. I love them for different reasons. The movie is much more childlike wonder, mysticism, magic, feels very cozy in that sense. This version is much more adult and is cozy in the way it's written, in the atmosphere of the book rather than the actual interactions between the characters. So Stardust by Neil Gaiman follows our main character Tristan, and he is born in a town called Wall, known because it has a large wall running throughout the town, and it is believed that on the other side of this wall is like a magical world, and it documents our main character Tristan as he is kind of forced to cross the wall because he has promised the woman that he is in love with that he will go and get her a fallen star, and she has agreed that if he brings her the fallen star then she will marry him. And it follows Tristan on this adventure, and as he meets Yvain the star and realizes that nothing he actually thought was true, and it's a very coming of age story for Tristan and coming into his manhood in this very cozy magical setting. So if you just want a very, very short, fast, very cozy read, then I highly recommend Stardust by Neil Gaiman. It's just like one of my favourite books of all time, one of my favourite Neil Gaiman books, and it's just very easy reading. I tend to read it around Christmas time every year, but it definitely fits for October too. It has that magicalness, it is about magical creatures. It has a slightly dark undercurrent running through it with the things that Tristan encounters and has to overcome in terms of the evil things and monsters and things like that. So I do think that this is a very, very good autumnal read, and I will keep screaming at everyone to read it at any chance they get because I love it so much. And then the next cozy fantasy that I have to share with you, there is not another book like this one out there, and that is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. And this is like a cozy, spooky circus setting. This book is Mirrorball by Taylor Swift. Like how Mirrorball sounds, and like that empty derelict circus sound, is the atmosphere of The Night Circus. Okay, this book is so cozy. So as you may have guessed, this is about a night circus, and you cannot access it through the day. No one ever sees the night circus arrive or set up or leave. It is just there one day and gone the next. There are multiple different point of views in this story. We see point of views from the people working in the circus, but also point of views from people going to the circus. It does all come together in the end, but you really have to bear with it. So my favourite plot point of this book, and the reason that I recommend it to everyone and wanted to pick it up in the beginning, is because we have these two magicians in the night circus, and they want to prove who is the best magician. So every year they host a tournament where they pick like someone to train up in magic, and then they fight to the death, and whoever wins, their magician trainer is then deemed the best magician. And in this event we have one of the magician's daughter, and then the other magician chooses a champion, except these two trainee magicians fall in love and no longer want to compete to the death in this competition. And it is the sweetest little romance story. I really like, what would you even call that? Because it's not necessarily enemies to lovers, but it is like we're on opposing sides and I'm supposed to kill you, but actually I'm in love with you kind of romance. I don't know what the shorthand for that is, but I just adore this book. It has a slightly spooky feel to it, but for the most part it is just very cozy. I have never been able to find a book that does a circus quite like Erin Morgenstern does. Caraval just is not the same. They get lumped together a lot, but this one is just so much better. This one is a perfect cozy fantasy, especially in like the October, November months. It's got a slightly eerie feel to it. As I said, it's just Mirrorball by Taylor Swift in a book. It's so good. run to the stores and read this. Next we have one of my favourite books of the year. Could actually be up there as the favourite one, so I just have to share it with you because the coziness is 100% there. This is probably like the coziest of all of the books in this category. It doesn't really have that much of a spooky undercurrent, it just does wholesome coziness very, very well, and that is Under the Whispering Door by TJ Klune. So this is a perfect autumnal one because it does deal with death and grief and ghosts, but trust me when I tell you that it is all handled so very, very well. So this follows our main character Wallace, and at the beginning of this book he has died, and it is about him realizing that he is dead, and so he is taken by the Grim Reapers to this kind of crossing, like the place where he will cross over. It is in between life and death, and it is, hold your horses, it's a little tea shop. So there are ghosts and humans in this tea shop because it is a cross between life and death, and it follows Wallace as he is forced to come to terms with the fact that he did not live the life that he wanted to live, and grieving for his past self whilst also learning how to comfort others dealing with grief and experiencing those who have lost someone dealing with grief. When he is given a chance to do things over and he gets a week to do that, he jumps at the opportunity to live essentially a whole life in a week. It is just a very, very wholesome book, and it made me cry in the best way possible. It has cute little animal side characters, it has a ghost dog, it just has everything, and I really loved the exploration of grief in this way. To me, this is actually better than House in the Cerulean Sea. I felt like this book had so much more heart, and I really, really recommend this one. I will be singing this book's praises for years and years to come. Like, it is cozy, it has ghosts, it has a tea shop. What more could you want this autumnal season? And then the final book, I know that you guys have already read, but just in case you haven't, you've been avoiding it, you haven't listened to me in every year prior to this year talking about how you need to read this book, and you've just ignored me, I'm putting it in this video too because I will not be ignored. This book will not be ignored. There was a period of time on this channel where I spoke about this book in every single video, and I will happily get back to that. I've reread this book so many times. I don't even talk about when I reread it now because it happens too often for me to actually talk about it on this channel. And that is The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue by V.E. Schwab. I was recently asked in like a job application what my favourite book was, and The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is kind of the one that felt the most correct to write down. I go between whether it's Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, whether it's Stardust, or whether it is The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. It's one of those three, and you need to read this book. This is like what I mean when I say that I want cozy autumnal fantasies. So if you are somehow unfamiliar with this book, which would be surprising to me given how much I have spoken about it, but how much the rest of the book community talks about this book. So this follows our main character, Addie LaRue, and she lives in the 18th century in France, and we follow her in the 18th century as she is kind of being forced into a marriage, but she really, really doesn't want to be forced into a marriage. She just wants to be free, and it follows her how she prays to gods during the daytime to not have her be married. Like, she really, really doesn't want to get married, but when she accidentally prays too long and she prays after the sun sets into the nighttime, then she is accidentally praying to an evil god, and he hears her, and she then becomes cursed to be free. But the condition of this is that anytime she leaves a room, no one will ever remember her. She can't write her name, she can't say her name, she can't leave her mark on the world at all. She is basically living an invisible life. And what I love about this book is that V.E. Schwab really kind of explores the extent of that. You don't really have a situation where you finish a book or a movie about someone with like a power like this and you're thinking, okay, but like what about in this situation? Like how would that work? Like, V.E. Schwab really puts Addie LaRue in these different situations to explore the limits of the curse. And so then we follow Addie through the next 300 years up until 2014 in New York. She walks into a bookstore one day, and the man who works in the bookstore, Henry, remembers who she is, and it follows their love story as they try to get to the bottom of why Henry can remember Addie. And it is just so cute! Every time I read it, I tear up. It's not even sad, it's just like a cuteness thing. I highly, highly recommend this book. It doesn't get cozier and more autumnal than this fantasy book, and this is also like a fantasy romance. It is more of a romance than a fantasy, but V.E. Schwab's books don't really tend to ever sit in one genre very well. It's very difficult to kind of pinpoint them as one thing, and this book just has it all. This is my favourite V.E. Schwab. This is, like, as I said, could be my favourite book in the entire world. I had a dream about Forget-Me-Nots last night. It's a sign. It is Addie LaRue season. And so then the final category that I have for you is books that are spooky but not that spooky because I am a wimp. So sometimes, just sometimes, I do like a darker, slightly spookier book, a slightly spookier fantasy, but I can never really like go in on like the horror. I'm sure there are definitely like fantasy horror books out there, but that's just not me. Like, I don't particularly like feeling scared or freaked out, and I like to read of a nighttime, and if I felt like I couldn't read of a nighttime because I was going to have nightmares, then it would just be a mess. So these are the books that are like, you know, they're slightly spooky, they're slightly darker, they are a good atmospheric fit for October, November time, but they're not really that scary. You know, they're kind of like aimed at children or something like that. So, you know, if you're in the same boat as me with this, then please let me know and stick around, because I'm sorry, I'm just a little bit of a wimp. I can't do the really scary books. So the very first book that I have to share with you in this category is Vicious by V.E. Schwab. It is a fantasy, but it's also kind of not a fantasy. As I said, V.E. Schwab's books are very, very hard to pin down genre-wise. You could also label this as dark academia. Like, should this be in today's video or the follow-up video? Very difficult to say. So this follows Victor and Eli, and they are mortal enemies, and we follow them in the present day as they are trying to track each other down and kill each other. We also follow them in their university days through flashbacks, and it is these flashbacks that are the like dark academia portions, and we see their history. And essentially their history is that during their university days they decide to do an assignment on extraordinary beings. When this experiment and this research becomes more practical than theoretical, they kind of start to fall out and drift apart, and things kind of start to go horribly wrong. A very typical dark academia setup, to be honest with you. But because there is fantasy elements and magical powers and things like that in this book, there are extraordinary beings in this book. So I would say this is probably a fantasy, and I'm putting it in this video, but it could also just be seen as dark academia. That is entirely up to you and how you want to do that. So this is a little bit spookier. It is a little bit darker than my typical reads, but I did really, really enjoy it. I will be picking up Vengeful, the follow-up to this book, this October. I just think that you will probably like it. It is a good balance between dark academia, spooky, but also really not particularly scary, just might set you on edge a little bit. You're not really sure who to root for, you're not really sure who is the good guy and who is the villain in this book. It is a very good exploration of the anti-hero. I think V.E. Schwab is just a nice author to read from if you are like me and you don't really want scary, but you don't mind a little bit of intensity and greyness in your books. So I would recommend. Next we have the most November book that I have ever read in my entire life. This book is just meant to be read on a cold November day, especially if it's like a dreary November day by the seaside. The vibes will be unmatched, and that is House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin A. Craig. This is a 12 Dancing Princesses retelling set by the sea, and it follows this family of sisters as bad things keep happening and bad things are befalling this little kingdom and this particular family of royals. And it is a very, very atmospheric, spooky kind of read. I didn't read this in October time, but I really wished that I had. I might reread it if I get the chance this spooky season. This is a good one for like a November TBR. It's just very, very atmospheric. I don't remember hugely the details of the story. I read this a really long time ago, but it is a little bit of a mystery. It's like a fantasy mystery type of book, but it is young adult, so it's nothing too freaky. It is just, for me, like the perfect blend of dark and atmospheric, but nothing untoward, and it's more of a dark atmosphere that drives you to want to discover the mystery and what is going on and what is happening to these princesses, more than it is like actually freaking you out. So I do highly recommend this one. The next book that I have to share with you, I have misplaced my copy of, which I realised when I came to do this video, and I am quite upset about it. So the next book is The Year of the Witching. This is perfect, like spooky levels. It is another good October-y read. It is about witches, it is spooky, it follows again this link between witches and feminism in particularly puritanical societies. It also just has threads of other like social history and social conventions brought into the storyline. It's not like a wholesome, cozy ghost kind of book. It is about evil, but it is a very, very gripping read. This is another one that could have been in the fantasies you can get lost in category. This is another good one for if you actually want something about like witches or ghosts or spirits. You want something particularly for Halloween that is kind of horror based but is not that horrifying, then I do really recommend this one. And then the final book that I have to share with you is A Deadly Education by Naomi Novik. This one is, I don't know, this is a strange one. This one is not hugely spooky or scary, but it definitely has elements of it. So this is a very setting driven story, and it follows our main character as she goes to this magical school, except she doesn't really have teachers in this school. The way that you learn is you have to just use the library and kind of figure things out on your own. And then this school is actually kind of like a really dangerous school. Like loads of monsters will spawn in this school, and she has to, like, they'll just attack you and you have to figure out how to kill them without really any teaching, and like you will die. And then in order to graduate this school on like graduation day, the graduation hall will just spawn with loads and loads and loads of monsters, and you just have to fight your way out. And if you make it out, you've graduated, and if you don't, sorry, you're dead. And so this follows our main character as she kind of navigates this very deadly setting, and the story is very much driven by this setting, and our main character is driven to form alliances based on this setting. But you also have to be very careful because you never know who to trust in this school. Everyone is just out for themselves. And so this has monsters and death and really like will put you on edge, based on, you know, the character, or any character could die at any second and you don't know who to trust, and it is a very intense environment. So it's slightly spooky, and like some of the monsters and like there are jump scares and things in this book, so ever so slightly spooky, but it's definitely not like a dark book. It doesn't have like the dark atmosphere of some of the other books. If you are someone who really likes school settings like I do, then you are probably going to really enjoy this book. And I still have not picked up The Last Graduate because I just can't seem to find the hardback anywhere anymore, but I really want to. I just haven't gotten around to it yet. But I love the cover of this book too. It is just like, inside you have a map of the school. I don't feel like it really gets enough love. I do think that Naomi Novik's writing can be quite polarizing. I've read some of her other works and hated them, but this one I really, really enjoyed. I think the setting makes all of the difference. So if you can get past the fact that it is this setting and this school setting that is driving the story, then I do think you can actually really enjoy it and just kind of enjoy it for what it is. And so here are the books. Can you see them all? Can you see them? Here are the books that I really recommend that you read. There is hopefully a book for every type of reader in this list. That was kind of the aim with the different categories. Everybody wants something different from autumn. I know lots of people like to reach for cozy mysteries or thrillers, but that is just not me, and sometimes I can struggle to find the recommendations that I'm looking for as either a contemporary or a fantasy reader. So I really just want to put together these two little like autumn reading guides for the different types of genres that I personally like to read, because if, like me, you don't tend to want to reach for mysteries or thrillers, then hopefully there is something in here for you, whether you like cozy, whether you like elements of spooky and magical without too much horror, whether you just really want to lose yourself in a fantasy that has some back to school autumnal elements, then hopefully there was just something in this list for you. If you have like an uber specific requirement, then do leave it in the comment section. Reach out to me on social media. It is at Page and Chapter on Instagram and Twitter. Reach out to me in whichever way you want with your super hyper specific requirement, and I will do my best to find a book for you. Maybe I will actually have already found a book for that, because I tend to really like over specify what the vibes of every book that I read are. Do feel free to reach out to me. If you guys have enjoyed this video and you'd like to stay tuned for part 2, which is romances and contemporaries, then do please feel free to hit that big red subscribe button down below to stay tuned for those videos. I upload twice a week on a Wednesday and a Friday, so there is no shortage of bookish content here for you to enjoy. If you guys have enjoyed this video, then it would really mean a lot to me if you could hit that thumbs up down below. It really helps out smaller creators like moi. And yeah, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, you found a book that you have enjoyed, and I will wrap this video up now. I hope you guys are having a fantastic week, you're enjoying everything that you're reading, and there are no reading slumps in your future. And I will see you next week for my next video. Bye guys.